Hi everyone, today we are going to talk about casting off on a round loom. There are different ways of casting off and every project needs a certain way of casting off, from loose and stretchy to just normal, traditional. And today I'll show you how to do the jeny'sstretchybindoff. This method is sometimes used also on the needles, so you are able to give even more stretch to your project and to your way of casting off. It could be that you like that elasticity and stretch, because then it's even more one piece with the elasticity of your project. Sometimes you fit it and you think, okay, it's rather tight over there, or you have indeed cast it off too tight. That's why I have this lifeline. You are able to try a method of casting off. You fit the project, and when it's not comfortable, you can easily put it back on the loom. This is the traditional way of casting off, where you let the loom do the job to create a regular cast off. And if you compare that to the jeny's, you see that the jeny's has a little bit more, well, much more stretch, so it's another way of casting off that mentioned jeny's. You can do the jeny's in a knit stitch or in a rib stitch, or purl of course. I have already done a few cast off stitches over here, and you see that the stitch has become larger than normal when you would cast off the traditional way. The only difference with the jeny's is that you make an extra movement, and that's a wrap. Just like the one when you let the loom do the job, it's just to get the order in your head, and then it becomes a bit easier to do. So, when you need a knit stitch, you are going to make a wrap. That wrap you can make this way. Then you are actually going to make a kind of E-wrap movement, or you make an U-wrap movement. And that movement you actually always make from here into the knitting direction. So the E-wrap you do like this because you knit in that direction, and a U-wrap you do this way, so from the right side of the peg. Would you make an E-wrap movement with the knit stitches, then you actually cast it off as a kind of purl stitch, and then you get to see the purl side of the stitch, so a kind of ridge. And with a knit stitch you make a U-wrap movement, and you get a kind of backwards yarn over, like you English or Americans would call that. Okay, I'm just going to cast off with only knit stitches now, just to show you the difference later on. But actually you do exactly the same as with the traditional cast off, only you knit over 2 stitches, and this will be your first peg again. So you make that U-wrap movement, you knit a stitch, and if you would knit an elongated stitch, you actually do the same. So you actually you extend the stitch. Maybe you can compare it with that the best. But now you extend your cast off stitch. Well, the rib stitch, the one I was knitting. I also have the tendency to forget that for a moment. So you wrap, you knit your second stitch, you move it to peg 1, your first stitch, and you knit them over. But just pulling a bit at your working yarn, you will see those 2 stitches better. And that's because I knit with 2 strands over here, and then you are able to knit over those 2. Sometimes it's slipping away a bit. Okay, we're putting it back to the project. Always make sure you do it exactly the same way, also in terms of tension. Otherwise you will see that one stitch is larger, smaller than the other. At a certain moment you will just get the feeling with what you are doing. So a U-wrap, knit the second stitch, put the second stitch at the first stitch and knit over those two. Just nice and gently, and you put it back and you adjust it a little bit. Another U-wrap. I call it a U-wrap movement because actually it's a wrap knit stitch. Soon you will see me demonstrate a wrap for the purl stitch. So you knit them over, put the first stitch at your project, another wrap, a knit stitch, second with the first, and you knit over. Put them back to your project, and this is again going to be your first stitch. Almost halfway, and now I'm going to demonstrate to cast off the last piece in rib stitch, so alternately a knit and a purl. I'm now going to knit a purl stitch. That means that if I would knit a U-wrap, I might as well not do that, because then it will come out purl-wise and you get a kind of ridge over there. So in this case you don't make the wrap from the right side of the peg, but from the left side. So it's like making an E-wrap movement. You knit the stitch and you make it a purl stitch. Well, then it's actually the same as before, and you knit over those two stitches. Just nice and gently, you adjust it a bit, you put it to your project, and this is your first stitch again. Now you are going to knit a knit stitch. So then you make a U-wrap movement. So wrap right or wrap knitwise. Actually, you can also remember it this way. At the moment you have to do a wrap for a knit stitch, you also go along the side, and that's the right side then of your peg. If you're going to do a purl stitch, so then you wrap from the left. So wrap purl-wise. So you knit along, and knit those two stitches over, grab the stitch and put it to the peg next to the project. I decided all my markers would be a purl. I'm going to knit a knit stitch. So I wrap at the right side of the peg, so right wrap. I knit a stitch and put it back to peg 1 again. Make sure they don't run into each other, or that you take a part of one stitch and from the other stitch also use the top of your peg to open the stitch again. So let the peg help you a bit. Now we are going to do a purl stitch. So we wrap to the left side, so purl-wise. You knit the purl stitch and you put the second to the first and you knit over. Well, you see here the cast off edge stays regular and it's beautiful. So I will continue casting off, and after I have finished I will show you the end result. 2 more stitches to knit. Actually it works almost the same as all the other ways of casting off. Also there you pull the working yarn through your last stitch when you have done casting off. let's see. I'm going to do a purl stitch now. So I'm doing my wrap from the left, second to the first, and if you can't knit them over at the same time, you can do them one by one, but I think you already know that. Because I want to fit this sock, I won't loop my yarn through and cut it off. Otherwise, when I put it back on the loom, I won't be able to continue knitting, because some cast off needs more yarn than this cast off. So you take it off the loom, and as you can see in a moment, it is quite a difference. So just secure your loop, and then you are going to have a look at it. So quite a difference. This part is done on a 24 and this part on a 31. So that's also a decision you can make when you make a yoga sock, for example. Pull at your project, stretch it so it gets the right tension, or the stitches are having the right tension. When you want to fit something, you always have to mark the inside of your loom, so when you want to put it back on the loom, you know which side is your wrong side. And that is necessary to continue knitting as you were knitting, so you might accidentally turn the sock inside out, so you know how to put it back. Well, I'm going to see if this way of casting off was the right one for this project, and for me of course. Let's take a closer look. This is my last stitch, so it has been on the loom like this. Well, here I casted off a number of stitches, and then instead of a wrap to the right, I did a wrap to the left. So then you get a kind of ridge underneath it. Here I casted off a part of the stitches only by casting off with a knit stitch, and you see that it looks a little bit neater than the one I showed you before. Look here, because I did some stitches with a purlized wrap, then you have the V-shapes over here where there should be a ridge. So here I have casted off with a knit stitch, and here alternately with a knit and a purl, so a rib stitch. And then you see, indeed, look here, the V shapes are here, and you see the purl stitch also a kind of ridge. So alternately, that from left and right, that gives the right edge, or a clean edge. So one more time, you see me casted off knit stitches here, but I did a wrap from the left. Well, it's not ugly in itself, but then you see that making the wrap from the right is important, how it will look. Here as well, and in itself you could cast off all the stitches in a knit stitch, then you only have to think of one movement, so the time you make a wrap. But the most beautiful thing is casting off in rib stitch. So there's a V where there should be a V, and there's a ridge where there should be a ridge. But it's your own decision, of course. So this was Jeny's Stretchy Bindoff. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you soon in another video. Bye bye.